I've always been curious if drawing is a talent you're born with or a skill that can be learned.
Growing up, I was fascinated by drawing, but always found it incredibly difficult to improve. My brother, on the other hand, seemed to have a natural talent for it. He could effortlessly draw anything he saw, even though he never practiced seriously.
This disparity between us sparked a desire to test if we could learn or improve our drawing skills in just 7 days.
We bought cheap sketchbooks and some pencils, and then we embarked on our drawing journey.
We decided to track our progress by drawing 3 things: a mug, a house, and a character of ourselves. These subjects will challenge us in various ways, and hopefully we'd see some improvements.
When I started with my 3 drawings, they didn't seem too difficult in theory. But the pressure quickly set in. After an hour, I finally finished all 3 pieces and was utterly disappointed.
Each drawing looks like it was drawn by a toddler who has just grabbed the pencil for the first time.
The worst part of it all is that this was me giving it my all. If after these 7 days I improved, then anyone can do the same.
Sadly, my brother had a completely different experience.
Seeing my brother's drawings, I felt confident nothing could be worse. I didn't spend as much time as he did. In just 20 minutes, I completed my 3 pieces. They weren't great, but given I haven't drawn from imagination before, I saw room for improvement. Now, we need to figure out the best way to learn. We watched many YouTube videos until we found a step-by-step roadmap for beginners to pros. With this plan, we sought out other tutorial videos to understand clearly what we needed to learn. Now, the real fun begins.
We started with the basic shapes. This was the most boring part of the challenge, but it's the foundation for everything we studied later. We had to master drawing squares, circles, triangles, and even lines. Everything we see can be broken down into simple shapes, so getting this step right was crucial. I had to focus on drawing using my arm, not my wrist, to improve my line quality. Despite my efforts, I struggled. My lines weren't straight and my squares looked off. I spent hours drawing them repeatedly.
Next was proportions. Proportions are essential for accuracy. We practiced by drawing the outlines of the objects and images, breaking them down into sections, and capturing what we saw without going into detail. This helped us understand how to scale different parts of our drawings correctly.
Once we had a grip on 2D shapes, we moved on to 3D shapes. Understanding this is key to drawing lifelike objects, as everything around us exists in 3 dimensions. We practiced drawing cubes and other forms, which was challenging but necessary for our progress. Next, we tackled perspective. Most 3D shapes we see follow specific perspective rules based on our angle and distance from them. We practiced 1 and 2 point perspective, focusing on drawing squares from different vantage points. We learned about the horizon line and vanishing point, drawing countless squares above, below, and on the horizon line. To test our understanding, we drew a door using these principles.
While my brother focused on perspective, I dove into human anatomy. I learned about body proportions and muscle structures. Even though it wasn't essential at this stage, this deeper understanding will help me draw more detailed and accurate figures in the future.
I've been struggling non-stop for starters. The shapes were impossible, even though it should be the easiest part. My squares would always look funny, and that would carry over to my cubes. I spent so much time trying to learn what a proper cube looked like and how to draw it that it left me feeling like I was making no progress. After a hard battle with shapes, I practiced proportions, drawing whatever I could find. And honestly, it wasn't too bad. I don't think I nailed it 100%, but I was doing better than I did with the shapes.
So far, these have been a breeze. I sped through the shapes and the perspectives. It felt like I understood it enough, and I was eager to try more complex things. However, when I finally did get to anatomy, I was struggling a lot more. I always found drawing people hard, and I still do. I am getting a decent understanding of the proportions of the body. However, the muscles and the differences between the male and the female anatomy have always been very hard for me to wrap my head around.
Next up were poses. Dynamic poses could elevate my character's drawing, but they were difficult. I needed to draw human bodies with proper proportions and correct perspective. I watched several tutorials learning to draw simple mannequins built from basic shapes. This made it easier to construct detailed poses.
We can't have a character without a head, so that was next. Drawing heads is tricky because they don't have a fixed shape, so we will use the Loomis method to simplify the head into a circle with guidelines for facial features. This method helped us place the eyes, nose, and mouth correctly. However, with different angles, this method is less useful.
Next up were hands, a notoriously difficult subject. Though not crucial at this stage, it was beneficial to understand their structure. Hands consist of the palm, fingers, and thumb, each with specific parts. Due to time constraints, I only followed a detailed video tutorial on the basics.
Finally, we tackled shading, which is crucial for adding depth and a 3D effect to our drawings. We learned how light interacts with objects by practicing with simple shapes. We then identified the lightest, darkest, and midtone areas to create realistic shading.
I was terrified of character poses. Looking at references and imagining me trying to draw them sent chills down my spine. I had no choice but to learn how to draw them. Luckily, the videos I watched simplified the process. It was not easy. At first, my poses would look funny, with awkward limbs and incorrect perspective. But practice did its job, and I started to get better at it. Sadly, drawing heads wasn't any easier. The head shape was easy to understand. It was the facial features that were impossible to draw. However, drawing hands was surprisingly enjoyable. Though it was brief, I saw the most success here, learning to embrace and learn from my mistakes.
So far, I have not been having the greatest time. I am a perfectionist, so when I ran into the heads and poses, I was down in the dumps. Each face looked horrible and my poses looked awkward. If I put it all together, I would see the monsters from my nightmares. Fortunately, after watching several tutorials and lots of practice, I managed to understand things a bit more. The poses always looked a bit more natural when I started drawing them like stickmen and then mannequins and adding the details if needed. With the faces, I still applied the Loomis method, and I would simplify the facial features into more cartoony or Disney-like expressions, which turned out better than I thought.
Finally, it was time to see if our practice had paid off. But I was terrified. I'll be so disappointed if I started drawing and ended up with similar results to day 0.
Starting with the house, I second-guessed my every move. Each line looked out of place, but I had to push through. The more I drew, the better it looked. Until I had the great idea to shade in some of it, and that was the worst mistake I could have ever made. I didn't understand how to shade it, and I made it look so much worse. I had to erase all of the shading and ended up just darkening my outline, which in my opinion made a world of a difference. Next was the mug, which took longer than expected. An hour and 30 minutes later, I finished my mug, and I was quite disappointed with it. Not my best work, but I couldn't expect much as I tried to shade it nicely and couldn't do it. I still had so much to learn about shading, but it was worth the attempt.
Finally, the grand finale, my character. But first, a commercial break.
It was my turn to take on the final boss. Similarly, I started with my house. I wasn't nervous for this one, but a few lines in, I felt overwhelmed. Each line I put down, I felt lost in this big white page. I couldn't imagine what the house would look like, and I was stressed that I didn't practice enough perspective. But I pushed through line after line until I finally finished the house. Next was my mug. This one I was a bit more worried about. I think I can get the shape of the mug somewhat down, but the shading is what I worry about. It's so complex and I struggle so much with getting a proper gradient. But I did what I could and just did what I learned in the videos I watched, and I managed to get this. I'm quite happy with it. It's still not perfect, but better than I expected.
We're back from the break. For my final challenge, everything I've practiced has led to this very moment. However, I let my pencil take the lead. Each piece was like a Lego brick. I started with the head and worked my way down, slowly building my character. Once I had the base, I started to layer onto it clothes, my mask, and hair. Luckily, I didn't have to draw a face as my mask handled it, but everything else was a challenge of its own, and to be honest, I think I outdid myself. Sure, this isn't the best drawing out there, but looking back at day 0 to this, it was amazing growth in just 7 days.
Finally, for my character, my main priority was drawing it in a cool pose, so I really focused on the mannequin drawing, getting the pose to look correct, and getting it to not look disproportionate. Luckily, I think I got it just right. I drew the details and just within 40 minutes, I finished my art piece. Is it perfect? No. But it's an improvement and I'm happy to see where I managed to get in such a short amount of time.
Reflecting on this challenge, the improvements from day 0 is amazing. The process was tough, but embracing mistakes and learning from them was key. Drawing isn't just about talent, it's about practice and perseverance.
This challenge was a success, but it highlighted the importance of practice and patience. If we could do it again, we'd take longer in each section, getting more comfortable before moving on. Consistency and repetition are crucial.
We encourage anyone to try this challenge, but take it slow and be consistent. So I guess that answers our question. Drawing is a skill that can be learned and improved with practice.
But what do you guys think? Did we get any better, or are we just as bad as in day 0?
If you would like us to draw for 30 days or longer, let us know in the comments.
Don't forget to subscribe so you can see what we learn next.